I swear every month that you all are trying to test me and to push my buttons to see if I can actually pull it out with your color choices, and I'm always surprised at where they lead me. And so, for those of you that are new here, every month on Patreon, I do a color poll and I put a bunch of gold and pink colors up there. And based off of your votes, I choose those colors that you most like me to want to play with, and I do a color study with it. And I always am surprised by your color choices, but I'm really always challenged, and I love the challenge of playing with a color palette that I wouldn't normally go with and then trying to make something from it. So this month you chose Payne's Gray, which is not a surprise because that's usually a fan favorite. Primary Magenta, which is a color that really wasn't a part of my bag of tricks a year ago, and Diary Lied Yellow, which was always one of my favorite colors, and then I stopped using it, and it's kind of fun to revisit it. But these three colors together kind of make a primary palette, but I'm going to call it a difficult set of primary colors because we've got cools and warms and we've got weird things happening and there's a lot of muted tones. So what I do whenever I do a color study is create this grid. And I just took, this is my Stillman and Byrne, my favorite art journal in the whole world. And I've just taken a ruler, made a grid, and you can see I've run the three colors across the top and the three colors across the side. And if you remember the days back in your times table studies, it is, in this case, Payne's Gray mixed with Primary Magenta, and I put it in that box. Now, I skip certain boxes because I don't need to know what Payne's Gray and Payne's Gray equal when they're mixed together. That's like a bit of information that is just not necessary for a quick reference for me. So I leave that box empty. But then I do the Payne's Gray with the Diary Lied Yellow. And if no matter which way you look, if you look across the top and you're like, oh, Primary Magenta, what is that mixed with? And the box to the left is the Payne's Gray. Doesn't matter which way you look at it. All grid rows lead to the mixed color. Now, these are about 50-50 mixtures of the paint color, which a year ago I thought that's how you mixed color. Newsflash, so limiting on the possibilities, but this top part of the grid is kind of where we start. So these three colors in the different combinations will give you their color out of the tube and these mixtures as 50-50 mixes. But once I started playing with these color studies, I was like, wait a minute, there's more to this than just a 50-50 mixture. Then I started incorporating into these color studies my bias study. Now, a bias study, for all intents and purposes, for this color study is we put one color, the Payne's Gray, and then the other color being the Primary Magenta. In the middle, because there's 5 boxes, that is your 50-50 mixture. And then as you get closer to the blue, we're adding more Payne's Gray into it. And as you get closer to the Primary Magenta, there's more parts Primary Magenta. It is not scientific at all, and I absolutely hate math. So I'm sure it would be like 50%, 25%, 12%. I don't know, but I don't do that math. Just know that the middle color is the 50-50 mixture that you see at the top of the grid. You can see that color kind of close enough, and again, not science, so I don't even know if it's 50-50, but my best guess. And then, instead of mixing 50-50, I will do, for argument's sake, let's say 75% Payne's Gray and 25% of Primary Magenta, and you can see the bias where it leans towards. It's leaning towards the blue because there's more blue in it, and how this color really has what I like to call personality or character. The colors out of the tube are no way, shape, or form limited to the colors that you see in the top of that grid. And this was a moment of epiphany for me. And maybe I'm alone and I was the only one in the entire world that was like, duh, moron. Use a bias mixture. You don't have to mix 50-50, but I went a significant portion of my artistic life thinking that's how you mix colors. And this color study has not only, this practice of this color study has not only widened my scope of imagination from just the colors that I have in my possession, but allowed me to work from a small set of colors in a total different way. You know, if you're like me, at one point you would have 50 colors out on your table thinking, oh, I need that color, I need this color. And now I'm able to understand color mixing and really utilize. And I think this is economical because now I've got so much more paint than I thought I had before. So as you see me mixing the biases here on the bottom, you'll see a true color narrative emerging. I know maybe it's not even shocking to you. Shocking to me. Shocking to me. And yeah, first of all, not a big, huge fan of purple. Those of you that know me for any significant amount of time, not a huge fan of purple. But for the love of God, do you see the colors that these are becoming when we add more primary magenta? And that's happiness. Happy, happy, happiness. So, these color studies, I like to say we've got information, application in this side, and then we do a actual painting project using it, and I call this assimilation. So we're not only just using the information we have, we're applying it to a paint scale, and then we're going to assimilate it into our art, which I think is higher order thinking. Those of you that are teachers out there or elementary school teachers, you know this is what you're kind of taught to do to your children in class, and I'm a child, I'm a study of art, and I am so glad that I have found a way to incorporate higher order thinking into just the use of paint color, which might sound silly, but yes, I was thinking so linear and so exclusionary. I was not being inclusive of all the possibilities. And how can that benefit me as an artist if I don't really take that deep dive into understanding basically the pigment I have spent a ton of money on, and just really almost like think about it as being on a desert island and you only have these three paint colors, which are not, they don't even include teal. These three paint colors, what can you do with them? And that challenge, that excitement, because color gets me excited. That excitement is what this is all about. And I've been doing this for almost a full year now. Those of you that have been following me on Patreon, you know we are almost 2 books in to these color studies, and so many of you have shared with me how your artwork has totally changed. You didn't have to buy any more paint. You just had to understand the paint that you had. And that's like, you know, you give a guy a fish or you teach him how to fish kind of shit right there. So you can see as I keep progressing through here, I'm working on a glass palette. Those of you that might be new to that, this is life-changing because I have a much cleaner work area. I used to have crap all over the place when I did anything. And this, you saw me scrape it with a razor, and I just scraped off the dried paint. It allows me to keep having a clean color palette without really using a million palette pads or palette papers and stuff like that. And then you'll start to see this narrative across the bottom unfold. Now, again, not exciting towards the Payne's Gray, which Payne's Gray is a fan favorite. Like, I haven't met many people, I was going to say I haven't met anybody. I haven't met many people that do not use Payne's Gray as a go-to color, but yet, look at how kind of boring. It is the most boring part of this whole color study, which is kind of good to know too, because maybe it's not always the go-to color. Maybe you want a dark blue, and maybe anthraquinone blue is a better one, or Prussian blue. This is just a reminder. But out of the tube, I get why Payne's Gray is a good color. It's kind of like a neutral, it's kind of like a grungy color. So those of you that like grungy, but that's what it's doing to this paint. The primary magenta and the diary lied yellow are not grungy colors. They're not dull colors. They're vibrant. You can even see what's happening to the colors themselves when they lean more towards the vibrant magenta and diary light. They're grungy the more blue they have in it, more Payne's Gray, and they're happy, that's not the right word, but you know what I'm saying, happy when you get towards these bright colors. This color right here, can we just stop and take a moment and appreciate happy coral? I have been on a search for the most perfect coral. This is going to be a close one. I really like this, and more so, I like when I did the painting that goes with this, how it worked together as a pink coral sherbet orange mixture, which is delightful. Totally delightful. But yeah, look at this. Now, I've never ever, have you ever? That's a game. Would have never picked up Diary Light and Primary Magenta and be like, oh, these are the colors. Because I always go to quinacridone magenta. Always. I don't know why. It's a habit. It's a bad habit. And I usually will do something like a Hansa yellow or cadmium yellow when I go to yellow. When I go to orange, a lot of times I pick up Diary Light because it's got like this orangey flair to it. But never would I've put those together. And I am so happy that I got a chance to do this. Thanks to you guys for choosing this palette. But that bottom row, it is like a clear departure from the other ones. But I love the lean towards the primary magenta, the bias, so to speak, towards the magenta, but also equally love it towards the Diary Light. And I think this bottom row here makes the right side of those palettes above it, or the right side, I should say, of the biases above it, come alive. And that's really the inspiration for the painting that I do over here. Because I always talk about how I let the colors from the color study kind of guide what it is I'm going to paint as a practice on the right side. The grid is kind of one phase, and then I always do that next, pushing it to the limit. Because here's another thing. If you're like me, I'm a hands-on learner. I can hear it, I can watch it, but it's not until I do it that I really understand it. So that's why this gridding is important. But then most importantly is to take the information that I've learned and the application from the bias on this grid and assimilate it into actual art, because that's what I am. I'm an artist. I want to make art. I want to pick the right colors, and I want to make something that makes me happy, and that's what this is about. Learning what we have at our disposal and then applying it to artwork, whether it's in an art journal or a canvas or ATCs or anything. It doesn't matter. A card. This could be knowledge of inks, watercolor. Just because I'm using acrylic does not mean that you have to limit yourself to acrylic. Oh, so in this one, I went a little step further. So those of you that have been doing these with me on Patreon, this is kind of where I stop. Every once in a while, I push it just a little bit further. But in the last open study that we had, the color study we had in the open studio, somebody said, well, what about not only doing the tint, which I did not address here, but those colors are all with the color it mixes and adding some white in there and making it a tint. So those of you that are wondering what the hell, why are there two colors in there? That's why I should have just addressed that a little earlier. But yeah, add a little white to the color it makes so I can see really the full personality of the color. But I typically never take, like, say, Payne's Gray and just mix it with white directly to see what that tint is. And so I did that in the middle. I had extra room. Why waste space? I took Payne's Gray, a little bit of white, the primary magenta, a little bit of white, and then I took the Diary Light yellow and a little bit of white. Anytime you add white to a color, it's called a tint. So anytime I mix a color, I add white to it to make it its tint so I can truly see how far it will extend. I kind of stretch it out. What will this look like if it gets lighter and lighter and lighter? That's, again, more information for me to be able to create with. And the more information that I come with my bag of tricks, the better painter I'll be. I take it one step further because I do this often when I want to know, okay, we've got these three colors. And I'm not going to lie, they're not necessarily pretty just painted out. What if I took equal parts, so a third, a third, and a third, and mix them together? What color will I get? Well, I was assuming mud, but I didn't assume this kind of pretty mud. It's like a grayish mud. And this is a great example to explain why I make each color a tint. So I'm going to put this color in there, and like, you can't even tell what, it's just dark. Like, literally all three of those made dark. In order for me to really understand what color it is, I put a little white in it, and that helps me to understand what color the tint or what color the base color is. So for example, this kind of has a brownish, It's not pure gray. It's kind of got a brownish, purplishish, bluish kind of tint to it. So that gives me more information about the darker value. And I mentioned the word value. Those of you who've taken my classes, you know that color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. So we need to understand value, bias, tints, and all of that information is going to get assimilated into the project or the practice that we do from this palette. So I always go in, note to self, because one time I didn't, and write all the color names on the thing or the grid after I'm done, because I did that once and then I couldn't remember what colors I did. And how the hell do you know what color that blue is unless you remember, or reds, because you have a million reds in your disposal, or yellows. So always go back and write what the color is. All right, so those of you that are on Patreon, you're going to join me for the practice, the assimilation of what we do here. Those of you that are not on Patreon, I would love for you to join me over there. Your subscription on Patreon gains you access to this lesson. I am priming. I like to tape the edges because I like to peel back the tape. I've taped the edges. I am priming the page with some gesso, but this one has a twist because I actually went back over that gesso and totally did something I've never done before, and that's just exciting. But I'm priming the page, so if you are working in a journal, then you want to go ahead and prime the page. If you're going to work on a canvas, well, certainly your canvas is already primed, but I do something really fun as the basis of this study to change things up, and I really love how it came out. See you over on Patreon, and thank you for joining me.